Back. Wow, 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 pura vida, mi gente. How you guys doing? Thanks for tuning in once more. Appreciate you guys making the time to be here out of your day and chill with me. We're gonna read review for educational purposes. Another review of the book Indigenous Peoples' History of the United States, a New York Times bestseller. Shout out to Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, the author of this book. pulled out a lot of babies and some good drop. And we're always ready to dodge the hijack. So appreciate you guys being here once again, reviewing for educational purposes, fair use, this book with me together, as we move on. We're kind of halfway through the review, right? We're halfway through the review. So I hope you've been enjoying uh so far the readings of this book again. An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. Get the book if you like it, and I recommend it. It is a New York Times bestseller. They ain't paying me to say this. She hasn't paid me to say this. I just, enjoy the reading, and hopefully she understands we're learning a lot from her for her. So thanks. And educational purposes, review, commentary, critique, fair use. All right. Shout out to everybody in the live chat. Appreciate you guys be coming through. Shout out to everybody. I just got my two bodyguards here, right? Can you guys see me, right? You guys can see and hear me? I don't see the chat moving. So yeah, I got my two little bodyguards right here, of all colors. Of all colors. But they the same, right? They family, no matter what color they are, right? Think about that. They family, right? They're the same, right? All right. So some of us are like that in real life. Appreciate you guys. We're gonna get to the reading. All right, we're gonna get to the reading. We're gonna go, where does it say? Chapter 7, Sea to Shining Sea. Sea to Shining Sea. All right. Sea to Shining Sea. Share. All right. So hopefully the music's not too loud. Again, appreciate you guys being here. We're going to go to chapter 7. It says here, Sea to Shining Sea. It says Captain Lemuel Ford of the 1st Dragoons, United States Army, made the above observation in his diary referring to Comancheros, Mexican traders in the northern Mexico who traded and intermarried primarily with Comanches on the plains. Mexican traders marrying Comanches, right? Whitey Thompson Jr. served as a U.S. diplomat to Mexico from 1842 to 1844. Army officers like Ford and diplomats like Thompson were not exceptional in their racist views. Indian hating and European supremacy, they call it white supremacy, right, were part and parcel of democracy and freedom. Welcome, welcome. Sit back and enjoy the reading. The populist poet of Jacksonian democracy, Walt Whitman, sang the song of manhood in the Anglo-American super race that had been stilled through empire. As an enthusiastic supporter of the U.S. war against Mexico in 1846. Whitman proposed the stationing of 60,000 U.S. troops in Mexico in order to establish a regime change there whose efficiency and permanency shall be guaranteed by the United States. This will bring out enterprise, open the way for manufacturers and commerce, into which the immense debt capital of the country, Mexico, right, will find its way. Whitman explicitly grounded this prescription in racism. And they're using the N-word here, right? He says the N-word, like the Indian, or, right? The N-word, you guys know what I'm talking about, right? Nigger. They're saying here, they're quoting him, right? They're quoting Whitman specifically, okay? Walt Whitman, a populist poet of Jacksonian democracy, right? He says the N-word, like the Indian or Indian, will be eliminated. He's saying black folks, just like any Indian, just like black folks and Indians, will be eliminated together, right? It is the law of the races. History, a superior grade of rats come, and then all the minor rats are cleared out. You see what they're saying, right? The whole world will benefit from US expansion. Wow. US expansion. What did we literally review the other day? 2 days ago, I think. We're talking about the Treaty of Peace and Friendship between the US, or the Corporation of the United States, with Morocco, and how it helped US expansion. You paying attention? Because this is right after that. The years I just went over. The whole world will benefit from US expansion, it says. We want to see our country and its rule far-reaching. What has miserable, inefficient Mexico to do with the great mission of peopling the New World with a noble race? In September 1846, when General Zachary Taylor's troops captured Monterey, Whitman hailed it as another clinching proof of the indomitable energy of the Anglo-Saxon character. Whitman's sentiments reflected the established U.S. origin myth that had the frontier settlers replacing the natives' people as historical destiny, adding his own theoretical twist of what would later be called social Darwinism. Wow. Social Darwinism. And now they're conducting social Darwinism on the American Indians. And what is Darwinism all about, right? Look, that's a deep statement right there. So remember, Treaty of Peace and Friendship. U.S. is able to capitalize. The colonies are recognized because they weren't even recognized by anybody. They were illegitimate. George Washington was the general. He did like a coup d'etat. You guys got to understand this. He wasn't the first president. The Articles of Confederation already had been established. There was already presidents before him, shorter terms. A lot of them black folks, most of them probably black folks. We're going to prove it. We're going to show it eventually. But he was a general to whom? If he was the first president, who was he general under? If he was the first president, right? So whose interest was George Washington, a lot of these revolutionary heroes, really for? You think it was for your ancestors, the American Indians? No, right? We've gone over that, and you see how that treaty allowed them to become capitalists, being recognized in Europe and everything, because of Morocco have free trade, generate a lot of money for their expansion, create an army, a navy, and this is the outcome. Eventually, years later, you get things like this, right? You get things like this where they're conducting social Darwinism on American Indians. We're talking about U.S. imperialism was allowed right after their treaty with Morocco. It didn't benefit the Indians at all. U.S. overseas imperialisms. Traversing the continent from sea to China Sea was hardly a natural westward procession of covered wagons as portrayed in Western movies. The U.S. invasion of Mexico was carried out by U.S. Marines by sea through Veracruz. And the early colonization of California initially progressed from the Pacific coast, reached from the Atlantic coast by way of Tierra del Fuego. Between the Mississippi River and the Rockies lay a vast region controlled by indigenous nations that were neither conquered nor colonized by any European power. And although the United States managed to annex northern Mexico, large numbers of settlers could not reach the northern California goldfields or the fertile Willamette Valley region of the Pacific Northwest without army regiments accompanying them, without their newly formed army, which they was able to establish after the Treaty of Peace and Friendship with Morocco. You guys, it all has effects. Everything that happens, everything they do is planned. Yo, shout out to you, James. Thank you for the donation, brother. Check out James Branch in the chat. Check out his channel, guys. Got a lot to say if you like to listen. Appreciate that, big bro. So they couldn't go anywhere without this U.S. Army, right? They didn't want them to become their own people, entrepreneurs, or deal with the Indians, right? Become friends, socialize, trade. They're trying to get rid of the Indians, right? So you got to go with the army. Why then does the popular US historical narrative of a natural westward movement persist? Why does that persist? This fake stories. Why is that really happening, man? Yo, shout out to Science, man. Much love, brother. Thank you, man, for the donation. Appreciate you guys. Why does this story still persist in our textbooks? Right? This whole fantasy story, manifest destiny, like it was some good spiritual thing, right? They were following their destiny. The answer is that those who still hold to narrative remain captives of ideology of manifest destiny, like I just said, right? According to which the United States expanded across the continent to assume its preordained size and shape. This ideology normalizes the successive invasions and occupations of indigenous nations and Mexico as not being colonialist or imperialist, rather simply ordained progress. In this view, Mexico was just another Indian nation to be crushed. The US invasion of Mexico has also been characterized as the first US foreign war, but it was not. By 1846, the United States had invaded, listen, occupied, listen, and ethnically cleansed dozens of foreign nations east of the Mississippi. You understand what they're saying right here? Just like this is what we're reading about, what that treaty the other day we read about helped do. It helped unrecognize and take away the sovereignty of the Indian nations. So they weren't no longer seen as nations. They're saying their first foreign war with a foreign nation was with Mexico in 18. No, it wasn't. You got rid of many nations. You got rid of many nations before that already. East of the Mississippi. Get it? Then there were the Barbary Wars. The opening lyric of the official hymn of the U.S. Marine Corps, composed and adopted soon after the invasion of Mexico, from the halls of Moctezuma to the shores of Tripoli. You guys have heard that before, right? Refers in part to 1801 to 1805 when the Marines were dispatched by President Thomas Jefferson to invade the Berber nation of North Africa. This was the first Barbary War, so-called, right, in parentheses, the ostensible goal of which was to persuade Tripoli to release U.S. sailors it held hostage and to end pirate attacks on U.S. merchant ships. Why is that important here with the treaty? Because they weren't, remember, they're not supposed to be going at war with each other or enslaving their own people. And if they do go to war, they're supposed to kind of trade a soldier for a soldier, an officer for an officer, a captain for it. We read that in the treaty the other day. We literally read that ourselves, right? So this is why they did that little war, because they weren't, some sides weren't following the treaties and they had to force the treaty. Remember what we agreed upon. We ain't supposed to be beefing. Allahu Wa, yeah, Mad, yo, Mad. Shout out to Mad Preacher, man. Thank you, brother. Thank you for the donation, man. Appreciate it. And so that's where that comes from, you know, that saying from that little war. It says the Second Barbary War in 1815 to 16 ended with Pasha Yusuf Karamanli, ruler of Tripoli, agreed not to exact fees from U.S. ships entering their territorial waters. By this time, throughout Spain's American colonies, wars of independence flamed. The leaders of these revolutions, inspired by the French Revolution and the Haitian Revolution, a successful independence movement arose in France's Caribbean plantation slave colony in Haiti in 1801. When the majority enslaved population overthrew the French planters and declared an independent nation state. This was the first permanently successful nation liberation movement against European colonialism in the world. The prevailing myth claims that the colonized peoples fighting for independence from Spain were inspired by successful U.S. secession from Britain, but this is a dubious claim. Simón Bolívar, or Simon Bolivar, was a major leader of the independence movement in South America. He visited liberated Haiti in 1851, a trip that sharpened his hatred for slavery and led to its abolishment in the independent nations that formed in South America. Hold on, I'm sorry. Bolivar and liberator José de San Martin were founders of the unitary republic they named Gran Colombia, or Gran Colombia, which survived from 1819 to 1830, with Bolivar as president. You guys know there was a country between them. They had created their own country. It was called Gran Colombia, man, right? Gran Colombia splintered. Subsequently, Gran Colombia splintered into the nation states of Venezuela and Colombia, which then included Panama, Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia. That's how big that was, guys. A similar unitary nation formed in Central America called the United Provinces of Central America, with its capital in Guatemala City, which existed from 1821 to 1841, which is literally part of our history here in Costa Rica. We know this, like Costa Rica was actually a province which was a part of all of Central America, which was one country. Central America, from Guatemala down to Costa Rica, was one country. And then Panama was connected to Gran Colombia, part of Colombia, Venezuela, and Central America, right, was one country. There's coins of, Central America and all that. And then we all got our independence by mail in 1821, something like that, by mail. So we all got our independence almost at the same time, right? Anyways, that's a little story. We're gonna get into all that eventually. I guess you guys don't know. So from 1821 to 1841, thereafter splitting into the present separate small states. In both cases, the larger and stronger unitary federations were subject to economic intervention and domination by the British and US empires. Father Miguel Hidalgo, a priest who was instrumental in the Mexican independence movement, was deeply assimilated into indigenous society in Mexico. And the majority of the movement's insurgent fighters were drawn from the indigenous nations. Most of the actual fighters in the independence movements led by San Martin and Bolivar in South America were also indigenous. You guys here? Representing their communities and nations, fighting for their own liberation as peoples. In striking contrast, the US War of Independence targeted the indigenous nations as enemies, okay? Who's the enemy? The indigenous nations, not Morocco, right? Not Morocco. This is what I'm trying to tell you. So who's having peace and friendship during these times, and who doesn't? They're still mad at me, by the way, for that video. They're very mad at me, guys. They held me hard. They're trolling hard. Anyways, most of the actual fighters, okay, we got that. It says fighting for their own, okay, we got that. It says the indigenous communities in the new South American republics were soon dominated economically and politically by national landed elites, all right? Puppets controlled opposition. They planted their own people. Listen, this is what they're telling you here. By who? By national landed elites that consolidated their power following the wars of independence. However, indigenous peoples whose ancestors fought for liberation from Spanish colonialism have never forgotten their important role in those revolutionary movements and realize that the liberation process continues. And I'm one of them, guys. Like, man, like what my people fought for, man, it's not how we're supposed to be living in Costa Rica. Like just like in any other country, any other place, when the indigenous people are involved and they're fighting for their liberation, eventually you get these fake leaders, get these implants, eventually take over the whole movement, the whole rebellion, and they're puppets. They work for the same people that people were fighting. So it's like a loophole. It's stuck, right? Because we don't learn from history, especially. This has happened so many times. You keep repeating it because we don't learn. right? Yep, even that back then they're using that. The indigenous peoples of Latin America feel they own those revolutions, whereas the US secession from Great Britain was the intentional founding of a white republic or European republic that planned elimination of the indigenous peoples as territorial-based collective societies. See the difference? He's saying like difference between people's Independence Day and America's Independence Day. But I get what they're saying though. The period of U.S. intervention to annex and dominate former Spanish territories in the Americas began not in 1898 with the Spanish-American War, as most history texts claim, but rather nearly a century before during Jefferson's presidency, with the Zebulon and Pike expedition of 1806 and 1807. Those historians who track continental expansion separately from clear actions of U.S. imperialism rarely note the juxtaposition in time and presidential administration of the interventions in North Africa and Mexico on the eve of its liberation from Spain. Like the Lewis and Clark expedition, completed the same year that Pike set off, the Pike expedition was a military project ordered. This is one we're going to do a video on this expedition here. It's very, very deep, right? So this Pike expedition was military project ordered by President Jefferson. Lewis and Clark had headed into the far reaches of the newly acquired Louisiana territory to gather intelligence. These were spies, right? This is another video we're going to do about Lewis and Clark. They were really like spies, just like Harriet Tubman was a spy that you get for the Union. You guys remember, right? Lewis and Clark were spies, reconnaissance missions, right? To gather intelligence on the Mandan, listen, on who? On the Hidatsa, on the Pauweti, on the Shoshone, on the Ute, and many other nations in the huge swath of territory between the Rockies and the Pacific, bordered by Spanish-occupied territory on the west and South British Canada on the north, okay? Lewis and Clark were spies, spying on the Indians. Yeah. Pike and his small force and soldiers and Osage hostages had orders to illegally enter Spanish territory to gather information that would later be used for military invasion, just like Columbus' first voyage. Oh yeah, we here, friend. Let's be friends and all this. Yeah. That was just reconnaissance. That was just to gather intelligence for the second voyage, where he brought all the conquistador and all the military for invasion, for conquest, just like they did in North America as well. That was just getting ready for military invasion. Gathering all this info, these spies, these so-called frontiersmen, spies, under the guise of having gone astray, Pike and his contingent found themselves inside Spanish-occupied northern New Mexico, today's southern Colorado, where they discovered, in parentheses, Pike's Peak and built a fort. It was already there. They discovered in parentheses. It was already there. That already tells me. Discovered. Look at the etymology of discovered, man. So, ultimately, as they had undoubtedly planned, they were taken into custody by Spanish authorities, who transported them to Chihuahua, Mexico, allowing Pike and his men to observe and make notes about northern Mexico on the way. More important, they collected information on Spanish military resources and behavior and the location of relations among civilian populations. Pike was released and in 1810 published his findings, later titled The Expeditions of Zebulon Montgomery Pike. The book was a bestseller. Oh, you guys hear that? Yeah. And it says here, U.S. colonization of northern Mexico. The instability of the impoverished new Republic of Mexico as it emerged in 1821 from more than 3 centuries of Spanish colonialism and an exhausting war of national liberation put it in a weak position to defend its territory against U.S. aggression. With Spain out of the way, the United States could pursue its own policy of imperialism without risking a difficult war with European imperialist powers, what George Washington had referred to in his farewell address. Listen, when he warned against foreign entanglements. Once Mexico was independent and its newly formed government immediately opened its borders to trade, something Spanish authorities had never allowed. U.S. trader William Becknell arrived at Taos in the Mexican province of Nuevo Mexico from St. Louis in 1821, and a U.S. trading party led by Sylvester Patty arrived in 1844. Traders based in St. Louis, at the time the effective western frontier outpost of the United States, began extending their business to New Mexico. Until the publication of Pike's book in 1810, U.S. merchants had shown little interest in trading in Mexico. Pike's account of the potential profits to be made inspired them to set out to capture that trade. U.S. traders would help pave the way to U.S. political control of northern Mexico through what came to be known as the American Party of Taos. You guys ever heard of that? Says Christopher Houston, or Kit Carson, would play a major role in the success of the U.S. invasion of northern Mexico as he continued work as a colonial mercenary. All right, this hero, he's a mercenary. That's who he really was. Born in 1809 in Kentucky, Carson was a fur trapper, right? An entrepreneur, as well as a noted Indian hater and killer. A fur trapper. What I tell you, these fur trappers were doing as well, trading as well, humans. They were enslaving many Indians and trading them too. And you see, this one was an admitted or known Indian hater. We got a lot of Indian haters even today, right? Anyway, so this Indian hater and killer who had left his family's homestead in Missouri for New Mexico at age 16, most of the U.S. citizens who made up the American Party, including Carson, married into wealthy, Spanish-identified families in New Mexico who had not favored independence from Spain, creating a strong Anglo affinity within the local ruling class. Creating this whole, I bet you was like a case, also lighting themselves up, this whole white superiority kind of thing too, right? Anglo. I want to be more Anglo. The goal of this clique was to attract and thus monopolize the trade in furs with indigenous and other trappers, with the ultimate goal of U.S. annexation. As a magnet, the traders would offer low-priced manufactured goods, from clothing to kitchenware, tools, and furniture. St. Louis was connected to transatlantic trading houses and cities on the East Coast, so it had the advantage of better variety and quality of goods than those of Chihuahua traders, who relied on the declining port of Veracruz. Bent's Fort, near present-day La Junta, Colorado, became the economic center for the fur trade in northern New Mexico, rivaling only John Jacob Astor's American Fur Company in North America. Missouri merchants circumvented the Mexican prohibition against exports of silver and gold, lifted briefly for silver between 1828 and 1835 through smuggling and bribery. St. Louis soon replaced Chihuahua as the entrepot for the northern Mexico trade, and the elite of Mexico's northern provinces became parties of the U.S. objective of incorporating the territory into the United States. As early as 1824, Missouri Senator Thomas Hart Benton introduced a bill in the U.S. Senate on behalf of citizens of Missouri for a U.S. government survey of the Santa Fe Trail to the Mexican border. In 1832, President Andrew Jackson began using U.S. troops to protect caravans of merchandise on the Santa Fe Trail going to northern Mexico from possible interference by indigenous peoples whose territories they crossed without permission. Without permission, huh? In addition to New Mexico, U.S. citizen residents laid groundwork for the annexation of Mexico and Texas and California as well. The Spanish Cortes Parliament had enacted a law in 1813 that authorized provincial authorities to make private property land grants. And this practice was granting land to individuals, including foreigners, was continued under the independent Mexican government until 1828. In 1823, Mexico's despotic ruler, Agustín de Iturbide, enacted a colonization law authorizing the national government to enter into a contract granting land to an empresario or promoter who was required to recruit a minimum of 200 families to settle the grant. You guys hear that? Just like the, what is it? Maison Rouge grant, right? The Washita, they had to settle 30 French families. That was part of the deal in the Wachita Valley. This is the same thing. It's the same things going on, different times, different places, right? So whoever got this grant had to guarantee 200 families, and the person in charge of the grant that was with the Wichita, they weren't able to fulfill the promise they had. So eventually they lost that contract. And when the lands were lost and sold, Louisiana purchased, because that was a Spanish grant that had no weight anymore. And so, like, we got into it in my Wichita Moore's video. Go ahead, check it out, get the whole details. Don't take it all personal and everything. Just go look at the facts. It's kind of the same as what it's saying here, how they were trying to sell land, and then they would require these people to settle like 200 families in this one spot, right? So they create a town where it could be a bunch of foreigners, you know? So they had to do that. It says only applied in the province of Texas. Many such grants were sought by and granted to slave-owning Anglo-American entrepreneurs, despite slavery being illegal in Mexico, making possible their dominance in the province and leading to Mexico's loss of Texas in 1836. Wow, you hear that? Senator Benton, his son-in-law, Captain John C. Fremont, and Kit Carson also helped pave the way for the invasion of Northern California. In the early 1840s, Benton and his daughter Jessie, Fremont's wife, built a booster press to entice settlers to the Oregon Territory, as well as to settle in the Mexican province of California. This is how they're slowly taking over Mexico, right, territory, right? Remember, that was all Mexico before, guys. That wasn't the U.S. At the same time, Fremont and his guide Carson mounted 5 expeditions to gather information, laying the groundwork for military conquest as spies, right? The 3rd expedition illegally entered the Sacramento Valley region from the north in early 1846, just before the United States declared war against Mexico. Fremont encouraged Anglo settlers in the Central Valley to side with the United States, promising military protection if war broke out. Once a U.S. warship was positioned for war, Fremont was appointed lieutenant colonel of the California Battalion, as if it had all been planned in advance, you see? They knew what they were doing. Exploration and intelligence gathered by Pike, followed by infiltration and settlement of northern Mexico provinces preceded by U.S. entrepreneurs, finally culminated in military invasion and war. And what came before all this? Well, many things, but one of the things was what? The Treaty of Peace and Friendship that allowed U.S., this colonial powers, this corporation, to expand, because it got recognized and it got funded. Now it had money, it had access to the whole Mediterranean, it was doing business, it created an army, right? It has now money to fund spies, pay fines and expeditions and explorations, right? That's what they're calling it, but they're really intelligence military gathering missions for invasion, for conquest. It was all planned. It was all planned. U.S. forces fought their way from Mexico's main commercial port of Veracruz on the Gulf of Mexico to the capital, Mexico City, nearly 300 miles away. The U.S. Army occupied the capital until the Mexican government agreed to cede its northern territories, codified in the 1848 Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Texas had become a U.S. state at the end of 1845. California quickly acquired statehood in 1850, followed by Nevada in 1864, right? You see, it's the outcome, right? Now they can create their states, right? Even though there was already nations there. You see, but now they're not legitimate. And now the fake corporation is the legitimate, thanks to the Treaty of Peace and Friendship, who gave legitimacy to Washington's colonies, 13 colonies. And then came Nevada 1864, Colorado in 1876, Wyoming in 1890, Utah in 1896, but the more densely populated Arizona and New Mexico not until 1912. All right. The Land Ordinance of 1785 had established a national system for surveying and distributing land. And as one historian has noted, under the May 1785 ordinance, Indian land would be auctioned off to the highest bidder, okay? Indian land to the highest bidder. The Northwest Ordinance of 1787, albeit guaranteeing indigenous occupancy and title, set forth an evolutionary colonization procedure for annexation via military occupation, territorial status, and finally statehood, okay? So this is what I'm saying. This is why I like this book, guys. He's giving you the drop-in details, the hijacking details. What is invasion? What is covert invasion? Covertly done, where it takes some years of operations, years of planning. There's a whole scheme to it that they practice till today in their US invasion and capitalism and global control that it has, all over the world. Now, again, thanks for that treaty making a corporation a nation, recognizing it like a sovereignty, a corporation, not the people, not the people. I hope you guys understand what I'm saying, like get it past the emotional part, you know? Conditions for statehood would be achieved when the settlers outnumbered the indigenous population, which in the cases of both the Mexican secession area and the Louisiana Purchase territory, like I said, this involves the Louisiana Purchase, right? Required decimation of forced removal of indigenous populations. In this U.S. system, unique among colonial powers, land became the most important exchange commodity for the accumulation of capital and building of the national treasury. Guys, understand the whole scheme? To understand the genocidal policy of the U.S. government, the centrality of land sales and building the economic base of the U.S. wealth and power must be seen. You got to understand all that so you can see the hijack. Apologists for U.S. expansionism see the 1787 ordinance not as a reflection of colonialism, but rather as a means of reconciling the problem of liberty with the problem of empire. Create their corporate empire, right? The beginning of their corporate empire, thanks to the treaty. In historian Howard Lamar's words, following the Mexican War, the United States faced problems more pressing than the of reconciling conflicting ideologies. For one thing, the vast majority in the annexed territory were indigenous peoples or Mexican farmers and ranchers, landed communities. As for the Navajos, Apaches, and the Utes who had resisted for centuries all the colonization efforts by the Spanish and then the Mexican authorities, they continued to resist the new colonial regime. To understand how the peoples of these regions responded to the U.S. invasion and conquest, and to understand their particular relationship with the United States today, it is essential to understand their history under Spanish colonization. We continue, says here, indigenous peoples of occupied northern Mexico. Although the Spanish crown had dispatched explorers, such as Coronado, Cabeza de Vaca, and others, and had established trading and military posts in towns along the North American Atlantic coast and in Florida, and along the Gulf Coast as far as the Mississippi, Spanish settler colonialist rule did not begin north of the Rio Grande until 1598. The soldier-settler colonizing mission launched a brutal military assault on the Pueblo towns in New Mexico. and imposed state and church institutions. The colonizers found a thriving irrigation-based agriculture, all right? These people were thriving when they got there to conquer them. These people were thriving with an irrigation-based agriculture. These are people in the desert, right? Supporting a population living in 98 interrelated city-states, or pueblos, the Spanish called them. Wow, guys, like, see, this is what I'm saying, man. Like, man, they were living in peace. They were living good there. Look what happened. Thanks to the treaty allowed all this to happen too. So how good, you keep using that treaty like it was something good for the indigenous people. And within 2 decades, they reduced the towns to 21. Wow. Perhaps most provocative given the Pueblo's extensive rituals and numerous religious feast days. The Franciscan missionaries forbade Pueblo religious practices, all right, and forced Christianity upon them. That's a major one. Why am I saying that? Because what did we learn yesterday, right? What did we go over again yesterday in my Thanksgiving video? What did we go over yesterday in my Thanksgiving video is how the Indians already had for thousands of years practiced harvest feasts. They had feasts of thanks, giving thanks to the Great Spirit for the first fruits. The first fruits they gave thanks. They had harvest feast. Again, it says here, I'm gonna read this part. Pay attention, right? This is how it all interconnects. That's why I said you got to watch all my videos to understand the wider picture. Well, what happened? These people were what? Perhaps most provocative, given the Pueblo's extensive rituals, they're calling it, in numerous religious feast days, just like Israelites, just like Hebrews, just like old world people had religious feast days, right? And what happened? They were forced to stop all that, right? Their religious feast days, and force Christianity upon them. And you still going with Christianity today. It's not the same, Kurimeo, I'm all about, No, no, no. It's all the same. It worked. Thousands of years later, or 500, 400 years later, the plan worked. Now you're a Christian. You forgot who you are, your lineage, how special you are when it comes to, we're talking about the people of the book, not just seeing yourself outside of that. Anyways, let's continue. Christianity upon them. As a Spanish repression and labor exploitation intensified, the Pueblos organized a revolution that also was supported by the unconquered Navajos, Apaches, and Utes, and the Hopi towns to the west in what is now Arizona. They were joined by the servant and laboring class of captive indigenous and mestizos in the Spanish capital at Santa Fe. In 1680, they drove the Spanish out of New Mexico, leaving the Pueblos free for 12 years before a new and permanent colonizing mission arrived. During another 130 years of Spanish rule, before Mexico's independence, the Pueblos were strictly controlled and forced to provide foot soldiers for Spanish forays against the Navajos, Apaches, and Utes, who were never colonized by the Spanish. Mexico ousted the Franciscans and left the Pueblos to their own lives, although much of their territory had been lost to permanent settlers. So these people are going through a lot. Whatever you think about them, whatever you want to say about them, I'm talking about these people in the 1600s. Now what you think of the people today call that? They were going through a lot of, bad, horrible stuff, just like any other nation at the time that was being colonized. But they, especially then, because they didn't, there was no repair. There was no repair. Repair never came. There was, whatever, Today's modern, that's a whole other thing, guys. I'm not talking about that. But these people were living very miserable under these imperial ruling governments or empires, right? The two largest Mexican provinces annexed by the United States, Coahuila y Texas, or Texas and California, were more sparsely populated and not as tightly centralized and organized as New Mexico. After 1692, as the Spanish crown sent an army to invade and reoccupy the Rio Grande Pueblos, it also sought effective control and settlement of California and Texas, in part to create a large buffer with competing French, British, and Russian imperialisms. After 2 centuries of dominance in the Americas, the Spanish state was crumbling politically and economically. having inspired a depression in silver production in their American colonies and growing competition from other European powers. The Spanish settled on maintaining and expanding its northern holdings to hold back French and British encroachment into the mining areas of the interior of New Spain or Mexico, right? In what is now the state of Texas, Spain built forts and expropriated land from the local indigenous peoples, granting it to Spanish settlers to farm and ranch. The first Spanish town in Texas, San Antonio, was established in 1718, and Franciscan missionaries founded the mission San Antonio de Valero de Alamo. Now, again, let's have clear context. I know you guys want to be the victim only, play the, I know you guys only want to say, hey, my ancestors were okay, no, listen. When it comes to these Spanish settlers, remember these included, well, most of them at this time were black folks, black Spaniards, black. Remember who founded California, Los Angeles? Most of the founders of all these places in the West were black folks, guys. Whether they were Indian or half European, or just straight European. Okay, remember that. Remember that. We've shown, and I'm gonna show some more. I'm not done with that whole West, right? Who's the founder of all these towns? I got so many already working on, like, just like the one in Los Angeles, right? Just like in Oregon, just like the state of Washington, named after George Washington, right? A black man. Remember? It's not indifferent here, guys. Don't think, oh, the white man came and because even the book might try to think that, not knowing, right, that there was black Europeans and that, all the history we know, the context. But just you guys remember that. So let's go, right? Have clear context. So these settlers, right? The first Spanish town in Texas, San Antonio, was established in 1718, and Franciscan missionaries founded the mission San Antonio de Valero de Alamo, right? Alamo. Spanish forest missions and settlements dotted the territory, especially along the Rio Grande from Matamoros to Laredo, which I've been through both borders because when I went, I've been through it by land, guys. I've been on a bus, not like not illegally, right? The indigenous peoples of Texas included the Lupin, Apaches, Humanos, Coahuiltecans, Tonkawas, Karankawas, and Cadus, right? The Karankawas, right? Who's the Karankawas? You guys know, the major players when it comes to Juneteenth. They were the ones being enslaved in those missions that were freed. And Juneteenth, it was the Karankawa people and Atacapa people, right? You guys remember, right? That's what I'm saying. See how all my videos come together when you do proper research. That's all connected. So the indigenous peoples of Texas, including Lupin, Apaches, Humanos, Coahuiltecans, Tonkawas, Karankawas, and Cadus, all of whom were more vulnerable to colonization than the mobile Comanches and Wichitas in the West Texas. By the time of Mexican independence, the indigenous population of the province was around 50,000, while Spanish settlers numbered around 30,000. Of course, Kimo Savvy. Of course, my son, Kimo Savvy. It's always been melanated people. It's always been melanated people. Like, you guys don't see, like, this is the way you gotta try to empty your cup. The way you picture stuff. Like, don't picture when they're saying European settlers and the first people, don't picture all this bunch of light-skinned people and then some few Sephardic Jews, a few black. Nah, you're seeing it in reverse. You gotta break out of that, break the spell, guys. All you, especially the new followers, you guys gotta, like, especially if you don't still hard having the time, catch up on the videos. It'll help you break out of the spell. Seeing the truth which shall make you free. You'll have the truth, and the truth will make you free from these spells. Yeah, there was whites, there was light-skinned people, albinos, all that. Yeah, we know all that. So what? Yeah, we know all that. We know all that. And again, I'm just reminding you that these settlers ain't just all pale skin, okay? Let's not go off topic. All right, let's. Yes, of course. By the 1800s, 1700s, especially. So anyway, let me continue reading, guys. So was talking about the settlers, right? And how the indigenous people in Texas, who they were, how they were getting eventually displaced, the population was going down. We know what happened to the Karankawa. Eventually, they were enslaved and put into Pueblo and missions and these pueblos, right? And then eventually they were freed, and now they're so-called blacks and Negroes and Africans now, right? African slaves now, huh? That's who they, that's who it was. That the history shows the truth. Anybody who really researches who got freed in Juneteenth, where did that happen? Who was living in that place? Who was really the servants or slaves, so-called slaves in that? Because they weren't really slaves. They were just like indentures. They were just living in missions under the Catholics, right? They're trying to take the Indian out of them. Anyways, during the first decade of Mexican independence, some 10,000 Cherokees, Seminoles, Shawnees, and many other indigenous communities east of the Mississippi avoided forced removal to Indian territory and escaped the Iron Heel of the United States, taking refuge in Mexico. All right? Your peoples went back to Mexico because a lot of their ancestors were already from Mexico, right? The ancient ancestors that come out of Mexico. A lot of their descendants went back to Mexico, right? You guys know about the what they call Muskogee Negroes and all that. Like you gotta dodge the hijack. They add the African and all that false narrative to them, right? If they want to add any foreign blood, it's Black European and American Indians. That's it. Anyways, so they avoided being forcibly removed. These tribes, right? But five civilized tribes in general, right? Including the Shawnees. By going to Mexico, one such community was the people of the Coahuila Kickapoo, or the Kickapoo Nation, right? Forced out of its homeland when Wisconsin was open for settlement. The Tohono O'odham Nation did not move anywhere, but the redrawn 1848 border split their homeland. The independent Republic of Mexico provided land grants for their various communities. With Texas independence from Mexico, the U.S. annexation, many moved south of the imposed new border. The Republic of Mexico opened a door to U.S. domination by granting land to Anglo immigrants during the first decade of Mexican independence. Some 30,000 Anglo-American farmers and plantation owners, along with their slaves, poured into Texas, receiving development land grants. By the time Texas became a U.S. state in 1845, Anglo settlers numbered 160,000. Mexico abolished slavery in 1829, which affected the Anglo-American settlers' quest for wealth and building plantations worked by enslaved people. They lobbied the Mexican government for a reversal of the ban and gained only 1 year extension to settle their affairs and free their bonded workers. The government refused to legalize slavery. The settlers decided to secede from Mexico. You see why they decided to secede? Because they couldn't have slavery, right? Just like kind of like the South, and but it's bigger than that whole Civil War thing. It's way bigger than what they tell us, anyways. But that's why they decided to secede from Mexico, initiating the famous and mythologized, listen, 1836 Battle of the Alamo. It's not a real thing, guys. Remember, this is a New York best time seller. This is very scholarly, peer reviewed. There's a lot of this is as mainstream as they would get into telling the truth, right? Or things that they don't teach in school, right? Like there's a couple hijacks, a lot of hijacks actually got dodged, but a lot of good drop here, knowing real history, what they're saying, right? We could read between the lines. And so the Alamo guys, and I should do a video about it. Like again, these are all future videos. We got to do detailed videos about everything. Everything has to be researched thoroughly, specifically, if you're going to talk about it, right? So the Battle of the Alamo is a mythologized, famous mythologized battle, right? Where the mercenaries James Bowie and Davy Crockett and slave owner William Travis were killed. Huh. Although technically in Anglo-American laws, the siege of the Alamo served to stir Anglo-patriotic passions, and within a month of the decisive battle of San Jacinto, Mexico handed over the province. This was a great victory for the Andrew Jackson administration, for the many Southern slave owners who became Texan planters, and especially for the alcoholic settler warrior hero Sam Houston, all right? The alcoholic Sam Houston, all right? So historically, he was known to be an alcoholic. The guy they named Houston after, right? Samuel Houston, the alcoholic. Wow. the former governor of Tennessee, Houston was made Commander-in-Chief of Texas Army and President of the new Texas Republic, which he helped guide to U.S. statehood in 1845. One of the first acts of the pro-slavery independent government was to establish a counterinsurgency force that, at its name, the Texas Rangers suggest, followed the American way of war in destroying indigenous towns, eliminating native nations in Texas, pursuing ethnic cleansing, and suppressing protests from Tejanos, former Mexican citizens. I definitely will. Mission San Francisco de Asís, also called Mission or Mission Dolores, was a Spanish Franciscan mission established on the Pacific coast at the same time as the Presidio or military base at San Francisco in 1776. That year, the Anglo-Americans declared independence from Britain. The purpose of the garrison was twofold: to protect the mission from indigenous inhabitants whose territory the Spanish were usurping, and to round up those same people and force them to live and work for the Franciscan friars at the mission. Mission Dolores was the sixth of the 21 Franciscan missions established between 1769 and 1823. When Mexico disbanded the missions, the establishment of the missions and presidios from San Diego and Los Angeles and Santa Barbara to Carmel, San Francisco, and Sonoma traces the colonization of California's indigenous nations. The 500-mile road that connected the missions was called El Camino Real, or the Royal Highway. Wow. You can trace the colonization route basically through this so-called Royal Highway, right? The Camino Real. The Spanish military in California was divided into 4 districts, with each Franciscan mission and strategically located presidios. The 1769 establishment of the first presidio in San Diego coincided with establishment of the first Franciscan mission in California. The second presidio was based in Monterey in 1770 to defend the 6 missions in the area, as well as the mercury mines in the Santa Cruz Mountains. So it was special interest, right? Monterey became the capital and the only port of entry for shipments to and from Spanish California, and it remained so until 1846, when the United States seized California. These California Franciscan missions and their founder, Junipero Serra, are extravagantly romanticized by modern California residents and remain popular tourist sites. Very few visitors notice, however, that in the middle of the plaza of each mission is a whipping post. All right, whipping post. Or again, who they whipping? Indians, right? Whipping post. The history of symbolized by that artifact is not dead and buried with the generations of indigenous bodies buried under the California crust. The scars and trauma have been passed on from one generation to generation, putting salt in the wound, as it were. Pope John Paul II in 1988 beatified Junipero Serra, the first step towards sainthood. Huh. Wow. California indigenous peoples were insulted by this act and organized to prevent the sanctification of a person they considered to have been an exponent of rape, torture, death, and starvation and humiliation. Guys, see? They try to make this guy a saint. The Pope, your Pope John Paul. Yeah. So this guy who raped, tortured, starved, and humiliated their ancestors, and the attempted destruction of their cultures. Serra would take soldiers with him, randomly kidnapping indigenous individuals and families, recording these captures in his diaries. As in this instance, he even wrote about it. Guys, there's primary sources about this. Ain't no primary sources about them doing this, going to Africa and come on, man. Show me the primary sources, right? So he said, right, this is what he said himself, says, when one fled from between their soldiers' hands, they caught the other. They tied him, and it was all necessary, for even bound, he defended himself that they should not bring him, and flung himself on the ground with such violence that he scraped and bruised his thighs and knees. But at last they brought him. He was most frightened and very disturbed. This is him describing how they were capturing Indians, right? In 1878, an old Kamia man named Janitin told an interviewer of his experience as a child. When we arrived at the mission, they locked me in a room for a week. Every day they lashed me unjustly because I did not finish what I did not know how to do. And thus I existed for many days until I found a way to escape. But I was tracked and then caught me like a fox. He was fastened to the stage and beaten to the unconsciousness, all right? You see what they were doing to the Indians, just like they said they were doing to so-called African slaves? California indigenous people resisted this totalitarian order. These insurgent actions are also recorded in official records and diaries, but they seem to have interested few historians until the civil rights era of the 1950s and 1960s, when California indigenous peoples began to do their own research. They found that no mission escaped uprising from within or attacks from outside by communities of the imprisoned along with escapees. Guerrilla forces of up to 2,000 formed. Without this resistance, there would be no descendants of the California native peoples of the area colonized by the Spanish. Under the protection of the U.S. Army beginning in 1848, gold seekers from all over the world brought death, torture, rape, starvation, and disease to the indigenous peoples whose ancestral territories included the sought-after goldfields north and east of San Francisco. As Alejandro Murgia describes it, unlike the native peoples for whom gold was irrelevant, the 49ers hungered for gold with a sickness. They would do anything for it. They left families, homes, everything behind. They sailed for 8 months aboard leaky, smelly ships to reach California. Others, captains and sailors, jumped ship at San Francisco, leaving a fleet of abandoned brigs, barks, and schooners to rot by the piers. They slaughtered all the game they could find and so muddied the rivers and creeks with silt that the once plentiful salmon couldn't survive. The herds of elk and deer, the food source for Native Americans, were practically wiped out in one summer. All right, in one summer, guys, the miners cheated and killed each other in the gold fields. All right, that's the primary source quoting. They're quoting. That was them, their own people saying that. In a true reign of terror, U.S. occupation, right? U.S. occupation and expansion, which was one of the key things that the Treaty of Peace and Friendship with Morocco helped do, right? So this expansion, this occupation, this reign of terror and truth and settlement exterminated more than 100,000 Californian native peoples in 25 years. And they probably enslaved and reclassified many more, right? And reducing the population to 30,000 by 1870. Quite possibly the most extreme demographic disaster of all time, right? But nobody talks about this Holocaust, right? Nobody gets reparations, and then you can't even talk about it. And then, oh, now everybody now, but these people don't get to be the victims, right? Only a certain people over there in the state of Chesa, right? Huh. Yeah. Here too, against impossible odds, the indigenous resisted and survived to tell story. Had they not done so, there would be no indigenous peoples remaining in Northern California because the objective was to eradicate them. From the onset of the California gold rush, crazed gold bugs invaded indigenous territories, terrorizing and brutally killing those who were in their path. These settlers seemed to require no military assistance in running roughshod over unarmed indigenous residents of fishing communities and a bountiful paradise of woods, rivers, and mountains. What and where? In paradise. These people were living in paradise, in a bountiful paradise, a real terrestrial paradise. This is the true promised land, guys, the true terrestrial paradise. And that's where the people were living, how they were living before all these, before this expansion by this corporation, who allowed this corporation to be recognized and to expand today and to become a global corporate power, that we live in a corporate world today. It wouldn't have been the case. I'm trying to make you think about something really deep here. It doesn't have to be the case, guys. What are we waiting for, Everybody want to say, oh, let's get together, let's unite, but then everybody's we and God and visions and goals ain't the same because they still stuck on old, outdated beliefs and biased beliefs and generalized beliefs. But these people, again, were just fishing communities in a bountiful paradise of woods, rivers, and mountains before they got slaughtered, relocated, reclassified, paper genocide, murdered, enslaved. The role left for the U.S. Army was to round up the starving indigenous refugees, to transport them to established reservations in Oregon and Oklahoma. You guys hear that? Now it says here, the European man's burden, or the settler's burden. The 2-year invasion and occupation of Mexico, and this is for the dismount, right? We're almost done, was a joyful experience for most U.S. citizens, as evidenced by Walt Whitman's populist poetry. Its popularity was possible because of buoyant nationalism, and the war itself accelerated the spirit of nationalism and confirmed the manifest destiny of the United States. Besides new weapons of war and productive capacity brought about by the emergent Industrial Revolution, there was also an advance in printing and publishing techniques, which increased the book publishing market from 2.5 million in 1830 to 12.5 million in 1850. Most of the books published during the 5-year period leading up to, during, and after the invasion were warmongering tracts. Euro-American settlers were nearly all literate, and this was the period of the foundational American literature. Listen, they were what? All illiterate? Were some of them incubators? Yeah. With writers James Fenimore Cooper, Walt Whitman, Edgar Allan Poe, John Greenleaf, Whittier, Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, James Russell Lowell, Ralph Waldo Emerson, Henry David Thoreau, Nathaniel Hawthorne, and Herman Melville, all active, each of whom remains revered, and studied in the 21st century as national and nationalist writers, not as colonialist. That's a deep one right there. These people were actual part of the colonialism. They were colonialists. Their writings inspired colonialism. They were part colonialist. Although some of the writers like Melville and Longfellow paid little attention to the war, most of the others either fiercely supported it or opposed it. Whitman, a supporter, was also enamored of the violent Indian and Mexican killing Texas Rangers. Whitman saw the war as bolstering U.S. self-respect and believed that a true American would be unable to resist this pride in our victorious armies. Emerson opposed the war as he did all wars. His opposition to Mexican war was based, however, not just on his pacifisms, but also on his belief that the Mexican race, in parentheses, right, would poison Anglo-Americans through contact, the heart of darkness. Darkness. Very subliminal. Fear. Emerson supported territory expansion at any cost, but would have preferred it take place without war. Most of the writers of the era were obsessed with heroism. Opposition to the Mexican War came from writers who were active abolitionists such as Thoreau, Whittier, and Lowell. They believed the war was a plot of Southern slave owners to extend slavery, punishing Mexico for having outlawed slavery when it became independent from Spain. However, even the abolitionists believed in the manifest destiny of the English race. See? Even these so-called abolitionists were part of the hijack, guys. As Lowell put it in 1859, to occupy this whole continent and to display there that practical understanding in matters of government and colonization which no other race has given such proof of possession since the Romans. And who's the original Romans, huh? They copied, huh? Well, they copied the Constitution after, huh? President James K. Polk, who presided over the war, saw its significance as an example of how a democracy could carry on and win a foreign war with as much vigor as authoritarian governments were able to do. He believed that an elected civilian government with its volunteer people's army was even more effective than European monarchies in the quest for empire. The victory over Mexico proved to the European powers he felt that the United States was their equal, standing tall through military victory over a weak country. It was not Ronald Reagan, or George W. Bush who taught up that idea. The tradition is as old as the United States itself, as the corporation itself, guys, as the corporation, not the people. The U.S. war against Mexico did more than annex half of Mexico. A debate that turned deadly ensued over whether the acquired territory would allow slavery, and it brought it on a civil war that produced 1 million casualties. You see, the outcome was the Civil War. Pay attention, like this, everything leads to, everything is planned, guys. The U.S. Civil War allowed for the reorganization and modernization of the military and streamlined counterinsurgency operations, that is, once targeting civilians. A rehearsal for this streamlining is found in the aftermath of the Mexican War and the U.S. Army counterinsurgency against the fierce resistance of the Apaches in the portions of the territory annexed from Mexico in 1848 that later became the states of New Mexico and Arizona, as well as across the new border into what remained Mexico. The 1st and 2nd U.S. Army Dragoons, cavalry troops were employed for this purpose, elite mounted troops well equipped and trained for the desert terrain. During the period between the Mexican War and the Civil War, indigenous resistance was led by Gila, Apache leader Mangas Coloradas to maintain the Apaches' traditional lands and way of life. The Dragoons employed the first way of war, total war, encouraging field units to attack Apache villages and destroy crops and kill livestock, slaughtering women and children and old men left in the villages, while the young men were engaged elsewhere fighting the Dragoons. You see how dirty they were, right? This kind of warfare against indigenous peoples continued throughout the Civil War and ratcheted up in the northern plains and southwest afterward, producing the term that the U.S. military used to this day all over the world when referring to enemy territory as Indian country. Okay? You guys understand? That's how the chapter ends. So again, enemy territory eventually equals Indian country, all right? Enemy territory, the same as Indian country. You understand? That's real history right there. And that's the end of chapter 7. Hope you guys enjoyed the reading. Hope you guys enjoyed the reading, okay? Hope you guys enjoyed it, man. That was a pretty good chapter. I'm really digging, enjoying the book. Thank you to Princess for sending me the book. She bought it for me. She had 2 copies. She sent it to me, and it's been great. And, you know, she did a great thing because now we're learning together. We're all reading it together, and it's a pretty good book to take drop out of. And, you know, we dodged the hijack, but you guys see how it all connects. All right. But I hope you enjoyed uh, the reading today's review under fair use for educational purposes, right? For educational purposes. So we're gonna go out with my boy Robin Dre Beats, Blood Rush by Robin Dre Beats. All right. Appreciate everybody that came through again. Hope you guys enjoyed the reading. Thank you, thank you, thank you for coming through. Thank you for your support. Shout out to everybody. Again, if you see things, people say things about me, right? If you see it somewhere posted, or always have context, make sure you try to understand the context, because a lot of people will try to make me look bad, you know, just because they're mad or feeling hurt by something I said, you know, and it's whatever, you know. I got nothing to hide. I just want to say that, you know, I got nothing to hide, and you know, everything's in the open, like literally. So I left it there. I left whatever the post there. I leave the post there, everything, right? Because you see something. But I responded. You guys can see my response. All right. But thank you for tuning in. Again, if you want to get to know me, contact me. We can talk. If you want to ask me something, if you disagree with something, if you want to talk about something, don't do it during my live chat when I'm live. Contact me and we can talk. We can get on a call soon, whatever, and we can go. You know, we can go over the sources, right? I got my 2 bodyguards here already, though, just in case you come with the hijack. You know, because we see you a mile away. I wasn't born yesterday, so you know, I'm not, you know, you may think you're trying to make me look bad, but eventually people recognize real and the truth will come out, and your fakeness will expose yourself, right? You expose yourself with your fakeness, right? And your hate. All right. So again, thank you for coming through, guys. Hope you enjoyed the reading. I'll give you your Friday back. All right.
celebrating my 27-year anniversary with my wife. Okay, today, all right. Well, we kind of started Wednesday, but we're doing it all the way till tomorrow, right? We've been celebrating, but we're gonna definitely. I'm not gonna see you prior to tomorrow afternoon. All right, maybe, hopefully not till Sunday. So, yeah, shout out to the wife. I love her very much. Yeah, 27 years, a work in progress. This is not an easy thing, you know, but we love each other so much. You know, we've gone through so much together, and we understand each other so much, and wouldn't be able to do none of this without her support, right? Wouldn't have a channel, wouldn't be me without her support all these years and love and how she takes care of me and the family, right? So shout out to the wife, all right? And shout out to everybody who, has their boo, their love, their soulmate, right? Shout out to all you guys. And you don't, hey man, it's never too late. And maybe, you got other things that are part of your destiny in this life, that are good for you. So look for them, you know. Hawa bless. Thank you for coming through, guys. Appreciate it. Much love and respect. All right. Pura vida. Pura vida, mi gente. Hawa.